What geography fact blows your mind? Palm trees grow in Ireland at 53 degrees north. In Canada at 55 degrees north there are polar bears. There are 14 mountains over the height of 8,000 meters. All of them are in Asia. Also 60% of people in the world are Asian. Australia is wider than the moon. My parents in Canada live closer to me in England than they do to my in-laws in Canada. Despite Canada being the US's neighbor to the north, the majority of Canadians live south of Seattle. There are more people in California than Canada. Not Earth's geography but Mars. Olympus Mons, volcano on Mars, is so big that it curves with the curvature of Mars itself to an extent that you cannot see the peak of the volcano if you would stand at the base of it. Edit 1. Change Mount Olympus to Olympus Mons. Edit 2. Changed Olympus Mons to Olympus Mons. P.S. Tell that to a flat marser. When I worked for FedEx back in the 90s, one of the reasons why they chose Anchorage as a global hub, apart from the fact that aircraft use less fuel due to it being cooler, was that it is one of the only places in the world that is within 10 hours of the three biggest global markets: North America, Europe and Asia. Who would have thought that a place considered in the middle of nowhere is actually the center of the world? If you took a boat out of Reykjavik and sailed directly south, the first landmass you'd hit would be Antarctica. Canada has more lakes than the rest of the world combined. Rubies and sapphires are in fact the same mineral, and both of them, as well as emeralds, are actually rarer than diamonds. I just now realized this said geography and not geology, oh goodness. Depending on where you are, you might have recently noticed a lot of dust from Africa coating your town. But dust from the Sahara regularly makes its way to the Amazon. In fact, without that dust, the Amazon might not even exist. The soil there is pretty nutrient poor, and that dust acts as a form of fertilizer. Two massive but opposing geological features, one full of life, the other very sparse, yet very strongly connected. Texas is large enough that I could fit Copenhagen, Brussels, Zagreb, and Warsaw with their real-life distances from each other inside the state lines. The Great Lakes contain enough fresh water to flood an area the size of Great Britain in over 100 meters of water. Not sure it applies, but the meteor that brought an end to the dinosaurs was so massive that the crater actually started forming itself before it even touched ground, due to the unbelievable air pressure. Edit. This definitely does not apply as I read geology and not geography. California is the closest state to Hawaii. Although I'm on the other side of the planet, only one country separates me from North Korea. France's longest border is with Brazil. Reno, NV, is farther west than Los Angeles, CA. Antarctica is the world's largest desert, since it doesn't get all that much rainfall. Also, if you put a cherry on top of it, Antarctica is the world's largest desert. Alaska is simultaneously the furthest west, east, and northern point in the US. Maine is the closest point in the US to Africa. Canada has the longest coastline in the world at approximately 243,042 kilometers. It's estimated that it would take more than 30 years to walk Canada's coastline at the rate of 19 kilometers a day. The coastline paradox is another interesting geographic concept. Norway is north, south, east and west of Finland. There is actually a tiny strip of New Mexico that is directly north of the Texas Panhandle, contrary to the level of detail that many maps can show. The Dead Sea is currently 429 meters below sea level and sinking about 1 meter a year. I did some work in Jordan, and that caused some GPS receivers to mess up, as they thought the negative height was an error. A meter a year. That sounds stupid fast for sea lowering. Are we talking water levels? Or is the entire bottom sediment layer sinking by that much annually somehow? Perth is the most isolated metropolis in the world. Russia and America are so close. Whenever I look on a map, they are on opposite sides. But they are so much closer, I roll. I know. I am an idiot. Maine borders exactly one state. Tennessee and Missouri border 8 apiece. Half the world's population lives within 300 kilometers of Mongket, Myanmar. Manila's population density is more than 100,000 people per square mile. In fact, the 3 densest cities in the world are all in the Philippines. The distance between the highest point and the lowest point in the contiguous United States is less than 85 miles. How far north Europe is? I always pictured Europe as roughly parallel to the US. So northern Europe would be the same latitude as Minnesota and southern Europe as Florida. Not even close. The UK is almost entirely north of the lower 48 states and Rome is further north than New York City. Puerto Rico's easternmost point is further away from Key West than Key West is to Canada. The Atlantic entrance to the Panama Canal is west of the Pacific entrance. Another one is the location of the French Riviera. I always thought it was some tropical paradise. It's on pretty much the same latitude as Milwaukee. WI. The Gulf Stream does wonders for Europe's climate. Not mind-blowing, but my hometown Aberdeen, Scotland, is further north than Moscow. Australia is the only continent with no active volcanoes. Alaska is actually huge. It's larger than Montana, Texas, and California combined. Yet, illustrated on maps as being tiny. I've heard that Alaska is so big. Ohio is the only state that doesn't share a letter with the word mackerel. Algeria is larger than Greenland. Greenland is roughly the same size as Mexico. America and Canada share the longest demilitarized border in the world. Detroit is farther east than Atlanta. I just learned that Pangaea was not the only supercontinent. The Panama Canal actually runs north to south. The country that spans the most different time zones is France. Because they have so many islands and areas around the world that are considered French soil. Britain also has a bunch of overseas possessions that belong to the crown. But unlike France, they don't consider these places to be part of the same country. The geographical center of Canada is in Nunavut. China has 14 neighboring countries. Russia also has 14. In Iceland, you can see where the North American tectonic plate and the Eurasia tectonic plate are moving away from each other. Another place that is similar, but not as intense, is Point Reyes National Seashore in California. It is separated by the San Andreas Fault, where the North American and Pacific plates come together. At high noon in Hawaii, when the sun is directly overhead, the shadows of objects evenly line up to make it look as if there are no shadows being cast. So objects planted in the ground would look like they're in a poorly rendered video game. This phenomenon is called Lahaina noon and it happens biannually. Greenland is further north, south, east. Roughly half of Canada's population is further south than the entire state of Washington. The Venus flytrap is native to an area roughly 60 miles around Wilmington, NC. I thought it was some recently discovered Papua New Guinea plant. Bristol, Tennessee is closer to Canada than it is to Memphis, Tennessee. Russia and Japan are only around 10 kilometers away from each other. North Korea and Norway are only separated by one country. The landmass of Australia is almost as big as the landmass of Europe. Ecuador and Peru are the only South American countries due south of Miami, Florida. There's a glacier in Pakistan that's about the same latitude as Texas. Baltimore proper has more people than Wyoming does. Montpelier, the capital of Vermont, has less than 10,000 people. Asia has a larger surface area than Pluto. There's an island called Disappointment. Canada is so big that Street Johns in Newfoundland is closer to London, England than it is to Victoria, British Columbia. And Street Johns London are separated by a freaking ocean. Britain as part of the UN has had control at one time or another of 171 out of the 193 United Nations. That the UK and France made a bullet train tunnel that went underwater. I went on it and it was a terrible ride but cool nevertheless. Funny. From a UK perspective this is just common knowledge. Though I understand why its existence might be shocking for people on the other side of the world. The only state never to record a 100+ temperature is Hawaii. Not Alaska. Not Montana or Wyoming. Hawaii. Russia's westernmost border and city in Europe is farther west than Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, Romania, and Bulgaria. The city is also farther west than Warsaw, Poland. Not really mind-blowing per se. But people forget about Kaliningrad Oblast. Lol. For all the Finland Bielefeld doesn't exist jokes. I'm surprised no one ever tried it with Kaliningrad given the weirdness of the oblast. Kaliningrad is closer to Berlin than Gusev is to Pskov or Smolensk. The Doggerland. A submerged area of land that connects Great Britain to the rest of Europe. It's flooded 12,000 years ago, forcing the peoples who live there to migrate to what is now the Netherlands and Great Britain. TLDR. It's a much cooler and more real Atlantis. Georgia is the largest state east of the Mississippi River. I thought it would have been New York or PA. Edit. By land area. The UK and France are the only two countries in the world which the sun never sets on entirely. Due to both countries' large number of territories all across the world, the sun never sets on the British Empire. France have longest domestic flight in the world. Mauna Kea is the tallest mountain in the world when measured from its base. It's about 33,500 feet tall versus Mt Everest at 29,071 feet. Russia is 1/6 the landmass of the world and Siberia would be the second largest country in the world if it was a country. Semicolon. Dang, I forgot Siberia was a company. Bangladesh has more people than Russia. However, in terms of landmass, Bangladesh has only 148,460 square kilometers and Russia has 17,125,191 square kilometers. Reno. Even though on the maps and how people describe Russia, it seems like a really big country. In reality, it's less than twice the size of the US. It's still a large country. I just overestimate it. Also, the largest country, Russia, is over 38 million times larger than the smallest country in area, Vatican City. The Earth is remarkably smooth. Everest at 85 kilometers above sea level compared to the Marianas Trench at -11 kms. A net difference of 19,85 kms on a sphere 12,742 kms. 156% of the planet's circumference contains all-terrain heights. The surface of a cue ball, 25 inches, has a tolerance for surface finish allowing pits or grooves to be up to 0.005 inches. 222% of its circumference. Earth is smoother than a cue ball. Even if you put Everest next to the Marianas Trench or dug the trench another 9 kilometers deeper, it would still be within scaled cue ball tolerance for smoothness. That there's a tiny disconnected section of Minnesota about an hour's drive north through Canada. It's called the Northwest Angle. And the only reason it exists is because of an error made during the drawing of the borders. The northernmost point in North America is in Greenland, which is technically Danish. I've always found it oddly cool that a European nation has the northernmost point somewhere outside of Europe. Not all that mind-blowing. But Virginia is farther west than West Virginia. Michigan technically borders Minnesota and Illinois if we count water borders. Also, New York borders the state of Rhode Island if we take water borders. And Yukon is the 5th smallest Canadian province. Oh yeah. And with water borders. A technicality. Yukon isn't a province. It's a territory. There has been a few times during Earth's history where natural nuclear reactors have occurred. There is a portion of the Sultanate of Oman entirely within the borders of the United Arab Emirates, Madha, an enclave, and another portion of UAE entirely within Oman's enclave, Noor, a counter-enclave. Maryland is the only US state without a natural lake. How humongous Africa is compared to the USA. I just recently saw a rendering of Japan compared to the US and it takes up the entire east coast. All the maps I'd ever seen made it look so tiny. It doesn't really blow my mind, but Rhode Island is the only state that begins with R. You could fit the United States, Europe, and India within the borders of Africa, with room to spare. At the western end of Kentucky, there's a portion of the state called the Kentucky Bend that you have to go through another state, even if flying, to get to it. The technical term is that it is an exclave of Kentucky. Also, the capital of Kentucky is not pronounced Louisville, Louisville, Louisville nor Louisville. It's pronounced Frankfort. There is no reason why the northern hemisphere needs to be drawn on top of maps and globes. Space doesn't have a top and bottom. Drawing it with the southern hemisphere on top is just as accurate, and it's kind of mind-blowing to see it drawn like that. I don't know if it's geography per se, but I read somewhere that if the sun was the size of a white blood cell, the Milky Way galaxy would be the size of the continental United States. That made me say whoa. Canada is 41 times the size of the UK and also has a provincial park larger than Switzerland. The City of London. It is a city in a city in a country in a country. The City of London is surrounded by the city, called London, in the country of England, in the country of the United Kingdom. Also, when you learn the difference between the UK and Britain, and England for some people. Why do people want England as the whole of Britain? France is actually a real place and people live there on purpose. The map most of us know is a lie.